right now, everything's all about fake news. Especially in our country, all we hear about is Trump, and everybody's wanting to, debunk what Trump is saying, and so everybody's out there on the fake news. However, the one area that I don't see that is really happening, it's probably the most important area, is in the area of healthcare. We need to be debunking the fake news that's out there, because there are real life consequences to this. This is different than some of the politics things that people are out to get, different politicians and Trump. I mean, these are lives that are being impacted. And I unfortunately know, as Peter said, I know firsthand what it's like. I became, as I like to call myself, the accidental advocate. I never set out to do this work. 15 years ago, I was living just my normal life. I have a career in advertising. I was married to my husband, Woody, here, about to start to have a family. And all of that changed with one phone call. On August 6, 2003, I got a call from my dad telling me that my husband was dead. And I'm like, dead? What do you mean dead? He's like, he's hanging. My husband died. He took his own life. He was hanging in the rafters of our garage, dead at age 37. Woody wasn't depressed. Woody didn't have a history of depression. Woody didn't have any mental illness. He had just started his dream job as vice president of sales with a startup company and was having trouble sleeping. So he went to his general practitioner, a family doctor that he has gone to for years and trusted. And because he was given Zoloft, which antidepressant, off-label for insomnia. He came home with 3-week sample pack of Zoloft. It doubled the dose from week 1 to week 2. There was no cautionary warning given to him or me about the need to be monitored. In fact, I happened to be out of the country in New Zealand on a photo shoot. So I wasn't there to see the initial demise of Woody. Woody had all the side effects that they said he would, like the night sweats, and ironically, his insomnia got worsened, which is why they gave it to him in the first place. But I will never forget something when I got back home from New Zealand, and Woody was sitting on the kitchen floor with his hands around his head, going, "Help me, Kim, help me. I don't know what's happening. My head's outside my body looking in. You gotta help me." Calmed him down, calls the doctor. The doctor said, "You have to give it 4 to 6 weeks to kick in." Woody was dead a week later. We never questioned the drug. Because Woody was, here was a guy that loved life. Like, why would he take his own life? It made no sense. But we didn't question the drug at that time because, it was given to him by his doctor. It was advertised and sold as safe and as effective. And it was FDA approved. Well, I certainly learned, so we started to investigate what was the only thing different in Woody's life. And the only thing different that was added in Woody's life was Zoloft. But everywhere we turned, all the so-called experts and suicide groups said Woody must have been depressed. But we didn't believe it in 1 minute, so we set out to find out. And ironically, the day that Woody was found, the front page of our newspaper said the UK finds link between antidepressants and suicide in teens. That was clue number 1. Clue number 2 was the coroner told my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, who became my right-hand person on this, said that we're going to take the drug with us. It might have had something to do with his death. So that night, thank God for Google, my brother-in-law put Zoloft and suicide in there and didn't realize that in 1991, the FDA held hearings when it was just Prozac and suicide. And then we started getting books, and Peter Bregan's book was the very first book that my brother-in-law read, the Antidepressant Fact Book, and it really started us on this journey. And I like to call it my battle for Woody. But so we immediately, almost within couple weeks after Woody died, and this was 2003 before there were warnings, we started going out to DC, meeting with anybody who would listen to us. Congress was starting to investigate it with kids, and that's why it's interesting that it was Paul Thacker, because I worked with Paul Thacker and Senator Grassley's office quite a bit at that time. but testified at the U.S. Senate. Many times at that time, the FDA was having hearings on the risk of the link between suicide and antidepressants. 2004 in kids, it got added, and 2006 in young adults. In addition, I did have a lawsuit against Pfizer, and in that lawsuit, we were able to get a bunch of documents out from under seal, and my lawyers are here in the room today, but we were able to get a bunch of documents out from under seal that showed the behaviors of these companies. And when you see these documents and you see it in black and white, you got it, and you had the experience of what happened to our family. It's too late for us, but I have to do something to make sure it doesn't happen to anybody else. And so through this, I was able to take it to the media and make sure, because as I was having a conversation with somebody in the audience about how do we make a difference, like how do we tell this story? And so really, I worked with the media. I continue to still work with the media and some big publications. And then really here, I go back to the documents. Documents speak volumes. And it's really important that in this in my lawsuit I did not settle with gag order, because that's a big thing right now, is that they shut people up, and they also don't have the attorneys that I did that worked really hard to get documents out from under seal. But really, at the end of the day, what I have learned, and I learned the hard way, is what a lot of you guys already know, and I kept hearing it a couple times, so I was glad I was on the same wavelength as garbage in, garbage out, because that's really, really true. But, it's really learned that it's the clinical trials, everything's driven by commercial interest. I was shocked at the lack of transparency and all the conflicts of interest that actually went back to '91 in the original FDA advisory committee. Every one of those guys on the advisory committee took money from the drug industry, and at that point said there was no link between Prozac and suicide. So that was a big thing. Who owns the clinical trial data? That was another thing. I think the public thinks that, the government does, and doesn't realize that it's really owned by the companies. And then also like the manipulation of clinical trial designs, like, all the stuff we were learning in with the run-ins, and then we also learned that they were able to create like new scales. They create their own scales that they use in clinical trials. And at the end of the day, they then take all that, and then they're the ones that create the industry-created screening forms and guidelines. One of the things I didn't realize, one of the forms that's called the PHQ-9 form, which is one that they use, it's pretty standard. That was created, nobody looks at the very bottom line on the bottom of the form. It says generous donation by Pfizer Inc. and 3 doctors. And I asked my doctors at my clinic, I go, do you know anything about these doctors? And they said no. Well, and then I'm like, well, I learned that they made all kinds of money. They were also expert witnesses in lawsuits against them. And so these are the people that our families, when we go to the doctor, are taking our screening forms from this. So it's all set up, it's one big ecosystem. And then I realized the government actually has a huge part of the responsibility. And just the whole FDA approval process, and in recent years now, more, and also the role of Congress. And I say Congress and legislation because they kind of go hand in hand. With the FDA right now, it used to be the gold standard was 2 double-blinded placebo-controlled studies, but that is not the case anymore. They have all these mechanisms that Congress put into place, such as the breakthrough therapy designation. Fast tracking. So it basically allows the companies to be able to present one clinical trial, and then that's what they use to get it approved. Well, I know in my business, and I'm in advertising, we know how to manipulate. We know how to manipulate when if we have to like present, go do a consumer study to see if this campaign sells. We know how to set it up to get the results that we want. So if we do it, I know that these guys have a lot more financial incentive than we do as an agency just to win a creative award. Then this whole idea of they who control the narrative really control the power. And I look at everything, and again, I have mentioned that I'm in advertising and marketing, so I kind of understand that game. And it's a machine. It is a well-oiled machine from the PR, from the time it gets, before the drug even goes to the FDA for getting the initial approval, they're already starting disease awareness campaigns. Then it goes to the FDA advisory committee, and then they'll be talking about things like breakthrough therapy. Well, then they know how to use mainstream media, because the mainstream media pretty much basically takes their press releases and where it says breakthrough, and that gets communicated to the public, which then breakthrough has a very different meaning to the people like me and the average person out there. That means like, wow, this is going to be something totally different and unique, and that's not really what it is. It's it's the mechanism in which they were able to get the drug approved. Then, of course, in our country, one of two that allows drug ads. I think that creates another whole, it really drives the narrative. It also drives people to our doctor's offices, because they're our gatekeepers, and all of our campaigns say only your doctor will know, or pretty much gets us to the doctor's office. Then when I learned about ghostwriting, to realize that a lot of these articles are written by other people that are written by the companies, that then they get into medical journals, and then as we heard today with the censorship and which ones get placed into which journals and all of that. Key opinion leaders, never heard of those before. And I can guarantee you a lot of what I'm saying right now, the average person, this audience might, but the average person does not know. And I also would think that there's a lot of doctors that don't necessarily know either, that have just bought into the system, that they don't learn about how it works at med school. This is a big one, is the patient disease advocacy groups and influencers. So, National Alliance for Mentally Ill, created by Eli Lilly. You've got every one of my drugs that as Peter mentioned, I'm on the FDA advisory panel, but they all have all these advisory groups, like and I'm on the Psychopharmacologic, so I have a lot of the psych drugs. But we'll have the anxiety organizations, we'll have the depression organizations, we'll have the suicide prevention organizations. Every one of those groups comes to these meetings and advocates for the need for more treatment. And when you start looking at the follow the money, they're getting monies, and they have big monies from industry. So they're talking heads. And it's a cheap way for them to not be the one in the bad, we're out for patients. And I always like to, I get in a little bit of trouble with my consumer advocacy groups, or that I work with, safe patient groups. I actually don't like the word patient, because I feel like we're customers, because patients are how they make business. And I know that's not right, but until we change it, I think we are customers. And then the whole idea of, influencers are big now, trying to find who's out there with the big audiences, even if it's a celebrity, but even people within the disease groups, and social media trolling. So we use them all the time in the advertising. If we know that people are saying bad things about our client, we go in there and we can flood those websites with positive comments. So again, I say, if we're doing it in cars and, soft drinks, beer, wine categories, they're definitely doing it in the healthcare drug space. And through my advocacy, I think I also now have a very unique perspective of how it works, because I now feel like I'm on the inside. I sit at on the FDA Psychopharmacologic Drugs Advisory Panel. And this is a very typical setup right there, where you got all the different committee members. And this was my last, I took a picture of this last one because it was the nasal spray for depression. And as Peter said, I have almost consistently been a no vote. And there's a lot of observations I can say about being on these advisory committees. Some of the drugs, Chantix, Nuplazid, which is the Parkinson's psychosis drug, and then, of course, the nasal spray. You know, it's interesting. The people that are sitting on the panel, you know, they tend to be mostly concerned about the clinical trial designs, and which there's enough people there, but I'm always looking at, like, what's the marketing plan? Because I see it from a marketing standpoint, and even before I go into, like Nuplazid, for instance, I didn't realize that they had tried a couple, you know, I want to go understand the business, just like I do when we take on a new business client. What is their business model? So Nuplazid, they had failed 2 times before, the drug company, and they were going to go out of business. Then I went and listened to the CEO analyst calls where he said that this drug has a potential to be $2 to $3 billion off-label. And I was like, wait, I know what their game is, get it approved on a small scale, but it's really about the off-label. Because once it's on the market, nobody's really responsible for it. A doctor can use it and prescribe it in any way they want. Then there's Chantix, which you know, it's the smoking cessation drug. Pfizer, I don't know if you're aware of it, but Pfizer was able to get the black box warning removed from this drug, and it's the first time that's ever happened where a warning has been removed. I was all excited because I thought I was going to be on the committee, and I was on the committee, except for like 3 days before I got a call from the FDA saying that it had been brought to their attention that I had an intellectual bias. Yeah, which I had to laugh. Because, and it was really Pfizer that had gone to them and said, we don't want her, because I had already, they learned a lot of their, the way they approached litigation for Chantix. I think they learned it from the antidepressants. And one of the things they did with, on the Chantix is they made sure that all the victims were shut up, and they could never tell their story in public. They could never, people had to take down their websites. People could not do any media, because there's power when you tell a real story. I mean, these are not made up. These are real people's lives. And then they went to the FDA and said, hey, we did some studies over in Europe and to show that there is no psychiatric side effects. So at this hearing, and I was really excited because I thought I was going to be able to ask all the tough questions, I wasn't able to, but I did say, I did ask him, I'm like, well, since I missed the open public hearing deadline, I'd still like to show up, and I'll pay my own way, and I'll be there. And they put me on silent. I would love to have been, a little fly in that room to hear what they said. And then they did come back and say, okay, we'll let you. But I only got my typical 3-minute, which is what they give us members at these hearings. But they were successful in getting it off. At the end of the day, I think we need to take our power back. I think we need to involve others. We need all of us to collectively work together. I think we need to have access to the raw patient-level clinical data, all the data, the stuff that was below the surface, the things that we don't know. I think we also have to have a debate of the science in an open forum. So I think about, and Peter knows because he bragging, Peter B. But when back in 2003 or 2004 hearings and 2006, I was shocked that they wouldn't have somebody, like common sense would say, why wouldn't you have people who have all this expertise? It was like Bragan, Dr. Healy. They were only given 3 minutes, just the same as I was. And the only outside person they had come and speak was somebody from Columbia University who got all kinds of money from the drug industry. And that's who's supposed to give us this other point of view. No, I think we need to have these kind of debates in an open forum, whether it's the journals, whether it's in places like this. It might be in church basements, I don't care, but like we need to have real conversations and not be afraid for the real conversation and to be wrong. But I know wrong's not a good thing. They would never. I think we also have to identify where there's bias. I think we've heard a lot of examples, and there's so many examples of bias in the research. I'd also like to think about, when we look at this, the role of lawsuits. How can they play? I look back at Chantix, and I know some of the expert witnesses that were in there, and they said that those documents should never be inside the company files. There's public health consequences. So I think we need to figure out and get lawyers. I feel really, really lucky. I had amazing lawyers that were activist lawyers. But there's a lot of lawyers out there that don't think about what and how to use the documents. So I think there's really something powerful there. I would say whistleblowers. We have whistleblowers here. I mean, Peter's a whistleblower. I saw Nancy's here. And these are people that we have to support and we have to encourage it and have, maybe this is a safe haven for them and that we can actually use them. And then I want to say stop the character assassinations. Peter's been assassinated. I've been assassinated. When I testified at the U.S. Senate, I was told I was a Scientologist. I mean, it's like, come on, enough. But, I just kind of ignore that, and you have to have tough skin. But at the end of the day, why does it matter? Because I'll tell you why it matters. People's lives matter. And this is not just something to talk about, it's business. Maybe until like a drug company executive loses their kid or loses their wife to something that they knew, or maybe they would never put their kid on it because they know. But until somebody does something, like this is why I look at all these are people I personally know. And I keep getting contacted, and I just got contacted by somebody else this week saying, keep doing this because nobody's out there speaking on behalf of truly, saving the public in these contexts like the FDA advisory committees. So anyways, thank you so much for letting me fill in.